Media Matters released a story that is so important and is not getting, as this article highlights, as much media attention as it should. It's sounding the alarm about a topic that was written about in a Bloomberg government piece, revealing that behind the scenes, Republicans are planning, if they get into the majority in the House, to use the upcoming negotiation around raising the debt ceiling as a chance to cut Medicare and Social Security. So we're going to look at this piece. We're going to look at the Bloomberg government one as well, and then watch Elizabeth Warren responding to this on Chris Hayes' show. But before we do that, to give you kind of the background, the first aspect you need to be aware of is every so often the debt ceiling has to be raised. And if that is not done, the United States government will default on its debt, and that would cause an economic disaster. And so this is a chance, if Republicans get into the majority in the House, for them to have incredible leverage and use that, as this reporting reveals, to possibly cut Medicare and Social Security, which is not the correct move. For a very long time, Republicans have said, oh, we need to talk about how we're going to cut these programs because after a certain number of years, they're not going to be viable. And while there's truth to the fact that as they're currently financed, it's not going to work after a certain number of years, but Congress could step in, pass a bill, fund it more, subsidize whatever that gap is going to be, and then all would be well. But Republicans want to use the fact that some action needs to be taken as an opportunity to cut the programs and the benefits that people are getting. And the primary reason, likely, is because they don't want to have to figure out responsible ways to fund these programs more, if that's what's necessary, because that probably includes taxing wealthy individuals more responsibly. And to be clear, the first thing we have to do that we're not already doing is just getting the proper amount of taxes that we have on paper, right? So that bombshell report came out however long ago it was, showing that the richest billionaires in our country are all paying a single digit tax rate when you look at the effective tax rate they're actually paying. So there is so much outstanding taxes we could get from those types of individuals before even talking about raising the number on the paper as it stands there, which I'm also happy to do. But you can see there's money out there that we could spend to properly fund these programs if there was the political will for it, but Republicans want to stand in the way and instead cut the benefits that the average American gets. And so this has to be talked about going into the midterms because people love those programs. People absolutely depend on them, expect and deserve them. And so making it clear that, hey, one party wants to protect, one party wants to diminish, if nothing else, these programs. Crucial. Let's read about this from Media Matters. On Tuesday, Bloomberg government produced a bombshell report that points to the massive economic consequences a Republican House would bring for Americans. If Republicans gain a majority following next month's elections, the outlet reported they plan to use a future increase or suspension of the debt ceiling as leverage to force through top priorities like seismic cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and other social safety net spending. Failure to act on the debt ceiling would result, as I mentioned, in an economic catastrophe, experts say. And then it goes on to highlight the fact that this is getting far too little mainstream media attention. We will show you Chris Hayes on MSNBC asking Elizabeth Warren about this. But besides that, nothing in mainstream media, even though this is a huge, huge story for people to be aware of. And then this is the original Bloomberg government piece. The Republican Study Committee, the largest group of House Republicans, released a budget plan in June that called on lawmakers to gradually raise the Medicare age of eligibility to 67 and the Social Security eligibility to 70 before indexing both to life expectancy. That is cutting out a lot of people who are expecting to get those benefits. It backed withholding payments to those who retired early and had earnings over a certain limit, and endorsed the consideration of options to reduce payroll taxes that fund Social Security and redirect them to private alternatives, trying to privatize that program. It also urged lawmakers to phase in an increase in means testing for Medicare. I will throw both of these articles, just for time's sake, in the description. Feel free to read further. It goes through all the different ways in which they plan on cutting these programs and significantly diminishing what is currently, what we all are aware of, which is hugely important to be discussed. But again, for time's sake, we'll skip past that. But that's kind of the summary of it, trying to find different ways to decrease the benefits people are getting from these programs so that they don't have to fully take action to fund them properly. Here is Elizabeth Warren responding to this news.
Senator, I wonder how much it is set in among you and your colleagues, the threat to the economy that might be posed by Republican just winning the House, for instance. If you go back and look at the record in 2011, do people on the Hill feel that, understand how scary?
And what he's referencing there is a similar tactic was used with the debt ceiling in 2011 between the Obama administration and some of the Tea Party members of the Republican Party, where they're trying to take these types of actions, but in the meantime, threatening to not raise a debt ceiling, which again would cause an economic catastrophe.
Scary that might be?
Well, we should understand it because the Republicans are loud and clear about this. They've already said, for example, that they will use the debt ceiling negotiations. We got to raise the debt ceiling so that we can meet the obligations of the United States of America. And there are already Republicans saying, hey, if they can get control of the House or the Senate, then they're going to hold hostage things like Social Security and Medicare. Remember, Ron Johnson, for example, who's running in Wisconsin, said we ought to vote every year on whether to keep Social Security and Medicare. So they want to be able to use these kind of levers to blow up our economy. And I just got to say, this is why we got 4 weeks. We've got to be all in these close races.
Yes, and that is what it comes back to. That is why this midterm election is so important. And with all of the problems they have, why it's important to vote for the Democratic Party in all of these races. Because whether it's the threat to democracy, whether it's the rolling back of rights for women, whether it's these economic issues, important social programs that people have, it matters. Our votes in this election matter. And people need to be aware of the fact that, listen, yes, there are so many problems that the Democratic Party has not even made an attempt to address, but at least we're seeing them take some actions and at the bare minimum, not trying to take away your benefits. Now, they're also working, as you saw with the Inflation Reduction Act, to cap insulin costs, lower prescription drug costs, expanding healthcare through the Affordable Care Act, investing in climate change, all these different things. But at a bare minimum, I think it's worth it to vote for the party just because we know they're not going to roll back our rights, roll back our democracy, roll back our benefits, and those matter. Those issues absolutely matter. So incredible stuff going into these midterms.